Sowing the seed of confusion, we're going to be having a look at the IMSBC code seed cake schedule changes that came into force at the beginning of this year. Unlike some of the other changes, such as bauxite, for example, which was very well known and very well publicized, the clubs found that these seed cake changes have slid under the radar a little bit. So we're hoping just to raise a little bit of awareness of what exactly the changes were, because there is a little bit of confusion about what the changes actually mean. And hopefully the increased awareness will avoid any friction with charterers or shippers in the future, which is kind of what we're seeing at the moment. Most of the problems appear to be based around time and delays and such things as that. So I'll quickly go through the rules. Won't take long, same as those normal for those that attend regularly. If possible, can you keep yourself on mute? It just affects the sound quality for others if we constantly keep turning our microphones on. If you have any questions, no problem, ask at any time. There'll be some space at the end or as we go along. We don't mind either way. There's a little speech bubble at the top there. You can type your questions out. No problem at all. We'll try and get those answered if we don't get around to them. If there's a few, I'll certainly follow up by email after the event as well. So we're really pleased to have Stephanie Hurd with us. Stephanie, would you like to unmute yourself and give a quick introduction to those that don't already know you?
Hi everyone, as John said, my name's Stephanie and I'm a food scientist in the Food and Agricultural Commodities Department at CWA, and we in our department look predominantly at bulk grain and seed cake cargoes and investigate damage which has occurred during transport and storage. So very happy to be here. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Stephanie. Always good to have you on board. We work quite a lot with Stephanie and the CWA team, so it's great to have her here as well. From North, myself, some of you may know or may not. Hopefully now things are getting to look a little bit brighter in the future. Maybe we'll get to meet up again soon. All I can say is I've got less hair than that now, believe it or not. So yes, I look forward to seeing you in your offices again soon. And also, I'm very pleased to say we have Effie here with us from our Piraeus office as Senior Executive for Claims. Effie's joining us as she has actually some examples to give of things that she's been dealing with seed cake since the changes in January. So I'm pleased to have her here with us as well. Any questions you have related to the claims side of it, hopefully Effie will be able to help us with those. Very quickly, I'm sure most of you are well aware of what we used to have. Now, I have to say, over the last sort of 4 years, things have calmed down a little bit with seed cake. But when I first started working for North, there was still a lot of confusion around the carriage of the cargo under these old schedules. So as you can see, in the old edition, there was 4 schedules for seed cake, 1386 A and B, 2217, and then this seed cake non-hazardous, which, to be honest with you, was the most common one that we saw declared. But like I said, still caused a few problems, both scientifically, which we'll cover with Stephanie, and as well sort of understanding wise for the shippers. But that was starting to calm down a little bit. Understanding from the shipper and documentation was starting to get better, but these changes have been made regardless to that. So what has been made? What is new? Well, we still have the 1386 A and B schedules, and we still have the 2217 schedule. But there is no longer the seed cake non-hazardous. That is gone. And that's the most common thing we're seeing at the moment is people still declaring seed cake non-hazardous. No such cargo anymore in the 2020 edition. It's been replaced by 2 schedules. And I think while we discuss as we go on the reasons for this were good, I'm not entirely convinced personally that the execution of it was brilliant. They've both got the same name for a start, which is causing a little bit of confusion. It's not the catchiest of names. Seed cakes and other residues of processed oily vegetables doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, and it certainly fills the space for the bulk cargo shipping name on the declaration. But we've got 2 of them now. We've got a Group B, so again, a hazardous cargo, and a Group C. So despite having the same name, we've got a Group B and a Group C, and no longer do we have seed cake non-hazardous. It's gone. So the big question is, Why bother? Why bother getting rid of seed cake non-hazardous to replace it with these two new schedules? I'd like to ask Stephanie if she could give us her thoughts behind the change to the 2020 edition, please.
Well, John, the seed cakes generally they have the propensity to self-heat because of their residual oil content. So they don't have a very high oil content, but the oil content does come into contact with oxygen, and upon that it can start to break down. And as the oil content breaks down, you initiate self-heating within these types of cargoes. So even without the presence of mold, it just based on the oxygen which comes into contact with the cargo and the moisture content of the seed cake cargo, you can still get self-heating. So despite there being schedules which define which cargoes might be able to spontaneously ignite with the higher residual oil contents, even in the non-hazardous cargoes that we were seeing declared, we were still seeing some type of self-heating, maybe not quite to the same extent, but it was still heating nevertheless. So it's quite important that we have a new schedule coming in so that vessels are aware that there could be some self-heating, maybe not to the same extremes that we've seen in the dangerous cargoes declared as class 4.2, but still we're seeing self-heating cargoes. So that's where this new schedules come in.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. And that's definitely what we saw in the club, is that they weren't being misdeclared per se as sea cake non-hazardous. They kind of fitted the bill, if you like, for sea cake non-hazardous, but we were still getting self-heating occurring, which was confusing for some of the members and quite frankly, in some cases, quite dangerous. And something that I actually only put these next couple of slides in yesterday. Back in 2012, we had a seed cake case, non-hazardous cargo. Citrus pellets, seed cake non-hazardous, fit the bill, fit the description entirely, but this was a couple of the photographs that were shown to us when she arrived. I think it was in Canada, and you can see the snow, like a lovely Christmas scene there, except for the one hatch lid there, and particularly my favorite, the one with the arrow on it there, which is all the seagulls keeping their feet warm on the single hatch lid that has no snow on it. And this was a seed cake non-hazardous cargo, and as Stephanie said, still had the propensity to self-heat. This one was an extreme example. You can see the picture on the right there, which is actually a thermometer that's been lowered to try and take the temperature, has just melted. And you can see further down the stow, we had some real problems with that particular cargo. So that is the background behind why they decided that changes were needed, because just declaring it as non-hazardous, they were still seeing problems, as Stephanie says. So if they've got rid of the non-hazardous, and they've replaced it with the seed cakes and other residues of processed oily vegetables group C. Now, what does that mean to us? Now you might wonder why I'm putting a bit of William Shakespeare up. It's not because I'm a great literature genius, but what William is trying to say here is that it's just a name. Doesn't really matter what we call it. It's the same stuff underneath it all. Well, unfortunately, William wasn't much for seed cake, and that's the main message I want to try and get across, is that this isn't just a name change. They haven't just taken seed cake non-hazardous and changed the name to the new Group C cargo. That is not what's happened here. There are actual new requirements based around this propensity to self-heat regardless of being a non-hazardous cargo. So it isn't just a name in this case. So Stephanie, if I could ask you to sort of outline when a member is about to carry the new Group C cargo, what would they expect to see declared? What would they be looking for and why?
So you still need your cargo declaration, and that should be accompanied by a cargo information sheet. on the cargo declaration, it needs to declare that what the actual oil and moisture content of this cargo is. And you'd also like to see the declaration accompanied by the actual certificate from the laboratory which is undertaking the analysis. But you also need the declaration to say that this cargo has not met the criteria to fit as a dangerous cargo. So that's class 4.2. And it's also been tested to ensure that it is not what they are calling a material hazardous in bulk self-heating cargo. So which we'll discuss a bit later. So there are a series of tests which an extra level of testing which needs to be performed to ensure that this is not a material hazardous in bulk self-heating cargo. So that's the main extra bit of information which we need on those declarations now. Okay. Okay, sorry, John.
Sorry, that's my fault for not unmuting. Yeah, I think the tests that you refer to are the thing they're usually missing. The other thing is just to quickly touch on and back up this actual oil and moisture content thing. That's something that myself and you, Stephanie, and Effie have discussed quite a few times when members have sent us the declaration. Is what we usually see as, for example, for soybean meal, the ANEC 41 sort of specification, max X percentage moisture, whereas what we're actually after is we have tested it and this is what the oil and moisture content actually is. This is how we're proving it's fitting into this category. But that's quite common. Stephanie, would you agree? Yeah?
Yes, absolutely. A lot of the time you just see the commercial specification and a simple sentence outlining that the oil and moisture content is below those specifications, but it doesn't give you any information about what the actual oil and moisture content of that parcel is being loaded onto the vessel. So it's really important that the real results are provided to the vessel.
Yeah, agreed. And of course, as you said, to make sure it's not class 4.2 and that it is tested for material hazardous in bulk for self-heating. And these are the two sort of new bits, if you like, that we are seeing consistently missing from declarations since January. And to clear up again, it's not just the bulk cargo shipping name that's changed. These are new requirements to ship this as a Group C. And I think we all get the impression that some of the shippers think if I declare it as a Group C, it's actually easier. I don't have any hoops to jump through with regard to hazardous cargo. But actually, in some respects, it's more difficult to ship the Group C cargo with regard to proof and declarations. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is the first of the tests that's referred to that's got to be done to ship it as a Group C cargo. So could you give us a quick run through as to what exactly is involved in this 9.2.2 test, please, Stephanie?
Yes, so the seed cakes, all seed cake cargoes should be tested to 9.2.2. And this is to test whether the SOLAS regulation deems the cargo as a class 4.2 material, which, if it comes in contact with air and even without energy supply, is liable to self-heat. So within the UN tests and criteria section 33, the test is described in order to determine the class of the cargo. The cargo sample, or a 25 millimeter or 100 millimeter sample cube, will be tested at 100, 120 or 140 degrees. And when it's heated up to those temperatures, if the sample undergoes spontaneous ignition, then it would be classed as a 4.2 cargo. Alternatively, it could dangerously self-heat, which is indicated by the sample rising above or has a temperature increase of 60 degrees over 24 hours. So again, if the sample behaves in that way, it would be classed as a 4.2, and it would be either a UN 1386A or B cargo or a UN 2217, and again associated as a class 4.2 material. So if the sample instead doesn't fit that criteria, and it doesn't spontaneously ignite, or it doesn't increase by 60 degrees over 24 hours, a second test needs to be undertaken, and that's to see whether it fits the criteria for being a material hazardous in bulk self-heating cargo. And I think we're going to go on to that shortly, aren't we?
Here is the slide for that, Stephanie. Yeah, the 9.2.3.3, the test in material hazardous in bulk. Give us a bit of an explanation to that one as well. I kind of give them an idea of what is entailed in that.
Yeah. So on your declaration, if they are if it has been declared as a group C, then the declaration needs to clearly state that it has been tested as per 9.2.33. Now, this test involves similar heating, but instead the 100 millimeter cube sample will be heated to 140 and 100 degrees C. And if the sample rises by more than 10 degrees over a set period of time, then that will be classed as a MHB, a material hazardous in bulk self-heating cargo, and it will not be a group C. So it will fit into the sea cake and residues of processed oily vegetables group B schedule. So it's still not a non-hazardous cargo. If, however, it doesn't rise by more than 10 degrees, then it is assessed that it does not meet the criteria as per the testing in 9.2.3.3, and therefore it can be classed as a Group C cargo.
I think even without sort of being a scientist, we can sort of begin to see why I referred to time at the beginning of the presentation, that if these tests aren't done properly, then they're not an overnight job, shall we say, to go right from sampling through to a conclusion of these tests is not something that's done particularly quickly at the moment. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, absolutely. If the declarations are coming back to you within a matter of hours with the change of name, the testing hasn't been performed, and it should be something to be wary of.
And I think Effie, in certainly one of the ones that you dealt with, that was pretty much the case. They were changed in almost a matter of hours rather than days.
Yes, that is correct, and I will discuss further in the next in some examples. But just to sum up, because I appreciate that it's probably new information for some of the members. So frequent inquiries that we're receiving is that what they should first check. So we do understand that a correct bulk cargo ship name should be provided, as you see the cargo declaration. So that should be your BCSN, which should come in bold and in capital. So other than that, say for instance, a member is getting the declaration and says Group C, what else? And there's no testing, nothing at all on the face of it. Should they be asking for a cargo information, say the certificate to exempting the schedule, both? So, as a sort of direction, Stephanie, just to simplify the process.
Yeah, well, ideally, you'd want to see the cargo declaration. You'd want to see the cargo information sheet and the analysis certificate for the oil and moisture. So you really want to see the three documents together, and especially the declaration needs to say that it has been tested as per 9.2.3.3, and it does not meet that criteria, and it does not meet the criteria either for 9.2.2 testing either. So you're exempting it from as a dangerous good, you're exempting it as a material hazardous in bulk, and there's actual proof of the testing. You could even actually, if you're concerned about whether the testing has been undertaken, you could even ask them for the testing results for the 9.2.33 testing from the laboratory as well, if there's any doubt, and that should be available from the shipper.
Great. So it should certainly prompt anyone on the face of it, if you don't see that any testing has been mentioned, just to make further inquiries and get the proper documentation as soon as possible.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a very pertinent point and question, because that's where we're seeing the problem really so far. Is the time that has been allowed to the member to make these inquiries and checks. Often the vessel sending its lines ashore before the declaration is handed over, and then the member is quite rightly sort of starting to ask questions. And as we've already sort of tried to demonstrate here, the answers to those questions may be somewhat long-winded, and that's where the friction is starting to occur. Is that right, Effie?
Yes, absolutely. And we have seen plenty of cases, which I will discuss later, absolutely necessary, if not before arrival to get that document, but certainly just before you start loading, because as we just explained, you do need some reasonable time, not only to review and perhaps get Stephanie's advices or local correspondence, but actually to find a local laboratory that could carry out the testing, and then the time needed to get the results analysis back. Really, you're going to lose 2 to 3 days for sure, from what I have seen at least lately.
Thanks, Effie. So that's the seed cakes and residues of processed oily vegetables group C. I think, as we've tried to demonstrate there, it is not just a name change for the seed cake non-hazardous, and it is not the easy way out for the shipper to declare it as this cargo. If anything, it's the more arduous path for declaration. Some of the others, okay, we have the catchily entitled seed cakes and other residues of processed oily vegetables. This time, though, Group B and not Group C, Group B. So, Stephanie, if you could just give us a run through on that particular one, what we would expect to see.
So again, you still want to see the actual oil and moisture contents, and ideally presented on the certificate from the laboratory that's undertaken, but at least it should be on the cargo declaration. It needs to also say that the cargo's free from flammable solvents, as with the Group C of this section as well. But you don't necessarily, because it is being declared as a Group B under the MHB self-heating criteria, that shows you that it's already been tested. So you don't need to necessarily see the certificate, but you're now alerted to the fact that you are carrying a Group B cargo.
Excellent. And it would be fair to say that, mind you, I would advise this maybe for any of the cargoes, even if it was the Group C one, that taking the temperature on loading is a good idea, especially as you start to get into these Group B versions.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's probably that will be one of the most important points to take away. Any seed cake cargo, whether it's a Group B or a Group C, really taking the temperature at loading is the best way to determine whether the cargo is self-heating at the point of loading or not.
Yeah,
and that's
perfect.
And that's all that is mentioned a lot in the IMSBC code, but it should be applicable to the Group C oily vegetable group as well.
I think that if in the member's heads or the master's head, let's just assume there could be some heating issues, even if they have declared it as Group C, is probably a sensible route to take with regard to monitoring the cargo.
Yeah, absolutely.
So onto the more traditional names, the ones that aren't quite as long-winded and twist your tongue up quite as much as that one. There wasn't a huge amount of changes in the normal seed cakes. I won't touch on 1386A because really it's unusual for that to be carried in bulk without permission from the competent authority anyway. Anything you'd like to raise on 1386B, Stephanie?
No, this was generally the same. Again, you need to know about whether this cargo has been solvent extracted or not, because a lot of the exemptions under this schedule are, for example, soybean meal, which has been solvent extracted would be exempt. So it's important to know the method of extraction. Again, you still need to know the oil and moisture contents of these cargoes, but because they're declared, because they fit the criteria for a dangerous cargo, they should be carried accordingly.
We usually find these are the more honest declarations, shall we say? Although because they're actually saying, look, it's a Group B cargo, it's spontaneous combustion. They've actually not got anything to hide about it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. 2217.
Again, there's been no major changes in this schedule, and as discussed before, that still applies.
No problem. So really, the main changes are around this non-hazardous scrapping and the seed cakes and other residues of processed oily vegetables is where we are seeing the main problems occurring. Most people are just thinking that it is a quick name change, or disturbingly, some of the shippers not even aware of said changes. But we'll come on to that. Must-haves, nothing new here. Declaration prior to loading. Effie, why do you think that this is important for you as in the claims team?
Thanks, John. Several reasons actually from a claims perspective to bear in mind, but mostly three main reasons to consider really. So to start with, you should really know what's on board your vessel. So that's the first and most important thing. Secondly, to avoid any delays at the load port and likely costly disputes that may arise. And obviously, thirdly, to avoid claims arising at the discharge port, and in the unfortunate event that it happens to be the case, to be in a position to defend those claims properly, provided that you have preserved evidence and documentation from the load port. Having said that, getting a proper cargo declaration, as we discussed and we can see on the slide, filled in properly and with the correct things before arrival at the port, and certainly before you start loading, is key in preventing delays, due to the fact that you will definitely be allowed some reasonable time to get your papers, review them. If, of course, you are in any doubt, we're always here available to assist and to address matters of concern in a timely fashion. As we have repeatedly said, if something is wrong, to have time to go back to the shipper or charter, change it, test it, and so on. So a fair question, I reckon, could be what could possibly go wrong when the declaration is not correct and when your vessel has arrived at the load port, and better worse, as we have seen, you have already commenced loading. We are all going to agree that in order to have the documentation sorted, in case you see that there are issues, there will be delays, definitely, due to the need to go to Stephanie or appoint local correspondents, draw samples, get in an agreement to jointly draw them with charterers and shippers. Equally, it will be difficult in some countries to find the proper lab. And this can be really time consuming in some countries, as I said, because they may not have the proper equipment. And you should also account for the time needed to get the analysis results ready. Other things to consider could be berthing delays. Again, whilst you're sitting there and waiting, delays are going to incur with disputes as to who is going to pay what. It's also likely that whilst you are waiting for everything to be sorted, the vessel could be ordered to shift to the anchorage. Worse, if you have cargo on board the vessel and it appears that you cannot really carry this cargo, more headache because this might need to come off. So logistic issues to consider. It will become more complex as to where to take it off. Costs are definitely going to be increased. And obviously of higher considerations may as well come into play. Another important point that I would like to highlight here is that the SOLAS requirement under the code will unquestionably take precedent over any contractual or commercial obligation you may have in your charter party. So for instance, if there's no agreement for the charter to provide or furnish such documents before loading commences. So if the declaration has not been provided before loading and loading commences, and there is the point where issues been identified straight after, this is likely to give charterers ground to criticize the vessel for starting commencing loading without citing the proper documentation. So at this juncture, we cannot but overemphasize how important it is just to preserve evidence, keep records of any exchanges you might have with charterers. Absolutely, John. Just you should avoid start loading. Yes, regular reminders to these parties so that your position can be supported, that you asked for these documents to be furnished in a suitable time, and the master obviously, if he sees any irregularities with a cargo, to issue letter of protest on time. And yeah, that is all. The only thing, sorry, John, I would like probably perhaps Stephanie could elaborate further, is that when we say there is this SOLAS requirement where it is mentioned suitable time, and although we have mentioned about the timings for laboratory tests, what is it suitable time? So for the sake of argument, a day before arrival, couple of days just before you start loading?
Yeah, I would say a couple of days ideally, because the initial 9.2.2 test will take 24 hours at least, and then to carry out an MHB testing as well, you're looking at another 24 hours. So ideally, yeah, 48 hours, you really would like to have the documentation in place. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the problem that we've seen. The members on the whole have been asking all the right questions. The problem that we've seen is this time. It is literally, mooring lines are going ashore and the cargo is declared, and then the questions are starting, and then there's that little bit of friction start to rise. Or why are you asking questions now? Everybody's heard the things before, but that is becoming very, very common with this cargo now. And just one thing I'd like to add to this that's well worth the members thinking about at this point: if they declare this cargo as seed cakes and other residues of processed oily vegetables group B, so the new schedule but group B, it should appear on your document of compliance for hazardous cargo by name. It won't just say seed cake group B, it should say seed cakes and other residues of processed oily vegetables group B. Okay, so if it isn't on there, then theoretically speaking, you shouldn't be carrying it. Even if 2217 and 1386B are on there, the new one should be named, the new Group B cargo should be named on your DOC. So if it isn't on there and you carry these cargoes a fair bit, it may be worthwhile preempting that change on your DOC to avoid yet more sort of questions. Or, I mean, if you've already got Group B seed cakes on there, you should really only have to approach your class ticket to get that changed, one would hope. But you don't want to be doing that after you've got alongside. Let's sort of be a bit proactive with that one. If you want to carry these Group B cargoes and your vessel is capable, then maybe you still need to update your DOC for hazardous cargo as well. Might be worth looking into. Okay, so as I said, since January, when this became, or these new schedules became mandatory, we have seen slowly but surely an escalation in problems. And bearing in mind, these are the ones that we've seen. They're and for myself and Effie, that's mostly with the Greek members, but they are going on in other regions as well. You've got some examples for us, Effie. I think we've touched on this time thing, but have you got any more sort of things that you've seen that you could let us know?
True, and the majority of the cases that we discussed and we have come across are related to improper or wrong declaration, cargo declaration with respect to the cargo shipping name, and consequently insufficient testing, or unfortunately no testing been done at all. So we have seen occasions where loading didn't start because members have been naturally concerned of the declaration being provided, and obviously their worries later on proved to be correct. So cargo samples were drawn, tested, and correct cargo declaration certification was provided. That was at least easy because loading had not commenced. There have been other instances where a wrongly declared cargo became only apparent at the discharge port. There, thankfully, there haven't been any issues during the carriage, but that was due to allegations of cargo being found caked, and most probably due to self-heating. But again, this is an example to indicate that irrespective of all these new amendments on the code, declarations were still being issued improperly. Now, we all appreciate that undoubtedly parties do come under considerable commercial pressure to move on with loading operations, and if you are already there, and sail a destination as quick as possible. So on that note, we have seen shippers and local laboratories just to change the cargo name from Group C, initially declared, to Group B, and then from B to C again. And I'm discussing of the same case, really. So on checking with local representatives and with CWA, we found out that it really is impossible to have a cargo tested for these properties 9.2.2 and 9.2.3.3 just within a few hours. So query, if you come across with those cases, and I hope not, as to the validity of these alleged test results being provided. Here, what we should be saying is that it's not a paper examination. It's not a requirement that a shipper should satisfy and say, we really need to see that these tests are likely or mentioned to be done. They should have carried them out, really. So these cases that we have been handled obviously indicated that that was not the case. And more worryingly, we have seen that local laboratories didn't even have the requisite knowledge of such changes taking place. And also, they didn't even have the necessary equipment to carry out such analysis. So I believe this is worrying and makes, it's necessary to raise awareness. So at least if you have the knowledge to be able to highlight and say, right, this is what we need really here, and check whether you can really have it. And this is why, again, we were going to repeat ourselves of how important it is to have all this sorted just before you get there, and certainly before you start loading. So in that particular case, yes, quite a few days were lost because the majority of the local laboratories, they didn't know what was happening and they didn't have the means of sampling the cargo.
The same laboratories that had declared it as safe cargo in the first place didn't have the
Exactly.
Yeah.
They thought that it would have been the easy way, but it wasn't actually. So again, among all the things that were mentioned, delays, friction with your counterparts, you do also run the risk of getting stuck at a load port until you find a laboratory that could do the job and carry out a proper analysis. And I think, John, you have also come across with some experts not being aware of this change.
Well, it was relatively reputable labs. Most of the ones that I've dealt with or have seen from members have been out of Brazil, to be honest with you. But the labs that have been handing over the declaration and the tests, I mean, I won't name them, but they are well known. And they have openly admitted to being unaware of these changes. And that's why, again, I hark back to that William Shakespeare thing. This isn't just deleting one bulk cargo shipping name and banging another one in its place. This is some actual testing. And the problem for the members is, and why we keep going on about the time to check the paperwork out, is that it's not their responsibility to do these tests. We know that. But the people whose responsibility it is seem relatively poorly educated on it as well.
Yeah.
Is that something that you would agree with, Stephanie, as well, in your experience this year?
Yeah, I mean, definitely working alongside you and Effie, it definitely seems that there's very little awareness in the industry that these new schedules have come into play.
I think they've really slid under the radar.
Absolutely.
I mean, the bauxite one had a working group attached to it, and I think nearly every man and his dog knew that the changes to the bauxite schedules were coming out in the 2020 edition. But this took quite a lot of people by surprise when it came along, and it is quite a big change. And as we've seen, the main problem actually isn't with the shipping companies, but unfortunately, the friction that comes out of it is a problem. So thanks for that, Effie. I think, and we have it was a relatively slow one, wasn't it? We had, I think, one in January, and we sort of put that down to, oh, it's just a one-off. But it's been slowly but surely sort of escalating a little bit across the other regions as well. We see more and more, and I think that's probably as awareness in the members starts to grow, they're starting to ask more questions, and more of them are starting to show up the further through the year we get. So time is one of the things to check this declaration. If you're carrying it, push as hard as you can. I know it's easier said than done to try and get those declarations in. They should have done the testing, so they should have those in ample time to be able to give you the declarations and the required paperwork that we've covered there, so that we're not starting this line of questioning when you get alongside. Something that appears that we get asked about a lot in loss prevention, it appears in the code for several of the schedules for seed cake. It refers to properly aged seed cake. Stephanie, can you sort of let us know what that's about? Because it's very vague in the code, and it's kind of thrown in there as if the master can do anything about it. But
yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there is anything the master can do about it. But properly aged seed cake means that after processing, the cargo has been weathered for a certain amount of time. So seed cakes, a lot of the time, they're processed under very high temperatures. Soybean meal, for example, it might be toasted so that it denatures the anti-nutritional factors which are harmful to animals, which are going to eat the soybean meal in an animal feed, so that they are generally processed at high temperatures. But you don't want to start loading the cargo if it's coming out of the production facility above 60 degrees, because that in itself, if the high temperatures maintained, can also initiate self-heating, because the oils will be thermally decomposed as well, and that can initiate self-heating. So they really need to age it by either leaving the piling the product in smaller piles and turning them so that the bulk material can equilibrate with the surrounding ambient temperature. And as I said, that's just to ensure that you aren't loading a hot cargo. Because and that again is why we are talking about measuring the temperature at loading, because in the code it also notes that if a seed cake's being loaded above 55 degrees or at 10 degrees above ambient, then this could be problematic. It could be indicative that the cargo's already started to self-heat. So regardless of whether it's a B or a C, it's really important to do that measuring at the load port, and that also will provide important information down the line in the event there is a claim. What was that temperature at loading gives us a lot of information about what could have happened. Yes, but as you said, John, unfortunately, there's no real way that a master and crew can control the aging process, of course, but they can control how the outcome is by taking temperatures at loading.
yeah, I think we've mentioned that already before. Mention it there again. I mean, and I think it's important what you said there, Stephanie, that when it's a Group C, what we have seen in the past, and I'm not suggesting anybody on this webinar does it, but crews tend to kick back a little bit because it's got that Group C applied to it. Oh, it's a non-hazardous sort of cargo, that'd be okay. But you start monitoring that almost as if it was a B, and less can go wrong in the long run. You're on your toes a little bit, even if it's that Group C cargo. You need to be monitoring the temperature on load as well. So speaking of monitoring, there are several references in the IMSBC code to the monitoring of cargo, seed cake cargo. To monitor the temperatures throughout loading and throughout the voyage. Can you give us a little bit of information on how to do it through loading? And through the voyage is an interesting one. It is in the code that they should do that, but doesn't say anything but that. There's not very much direction.
Yes, so a surveyor could be nominated at the load port who could take temperatures of the cargo at regular intervals. They could either take the temperatures from the trucks that are delivering cargo, if available, or the barges delivering cargo, if that's safe to do so. There may be points on the conveyor belt as well, if loading is done in that way, that they could obtain temperatures there. If they can't get access to the cargo in those ways prior to it being loaded on board, if there's breaks during loading and it's safe to do so, the surveyor could enter the hold and physically take the temperatures from inside the hold, but of course only if it's safe to do so. So there's multiple ways that those temperatures can be taken. Not only are they going to be useful to determine whether the cargo is hot loaded or potentially self-heating, but this is also going to form the basis of your temperature, your loading temperature, if you're going to follow the 3-degree rule for ventilation during the voyage. So you're kind of hitting two birds with one stone in that respect. But yeah, during the voyage, it's also recommended to take the temperature of the cargo. Of course, the crew can't enter the hold headspace during the voyage, but they could measure the temperature down the temperature sounding pipes, which are located at the forward or the aft of the hold. And although the cargo is quite insulating, so it's not definite that it would be able to provide an indication if the cargo is heating, it could provide some indication. If the heating is quite extensive, then it's likely it's going to pick up large amounts of heating in the hold in that way. So it's always a good idea to keep those records during the voyage as well.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the problems we've seen with other bulk cargoes, is that the set positions of the temperature taking portals for taking this is, if the heating isn't directly there, then it can take quite some time before the heating is noticed. The Cheshire is one that springs to mind. Whilst it wasn't obviously seed cake, the ammonium nitrate, the heating was actually picked up in a different hold initially, because the sampling point was so far away from the heating. So you have to bear that in mind, but it's still really important that you do it, and small fluctuations could be a sign of something to maybe increase the amount of times you're taking your temperatures if you see something that maybe you're not too happy about.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and of course, taking a temperature on loading correlates directly into ventilation for the passage as well, Stephanie.
Yeah, absolutely. So the 3-degree rule, which we recommend, is undertaken by ventilating when the loading cargo temperature is 3 degrees or more above the ambient temperature. So having that already, the temperature is already taken and the mean temperature calculated for each hold, that's very easy for the crew to use that one temperature set. They don't have to rely on calculating dew points or obtaining dew points from the headspace. They're just comparing that load port set of temperatures to the ambient dry temperature during the voyage. So nice and easy for them to.
And to get that dew point in the headspace safely is virtually impossible. To be fair,
Yeah.
I mean, I think Effie will back this up. That the records of all of these temperatures and loading temperatures and voyage and the ventilation are 100% important when it comes to any claims coming at the end. And the 3-degree rule is more accurate on the whole for the aftermath as well.
Yes, I agree 100%.
Yeah, we see too many dew points. First time we get sent them, if Effie sends me, well, what do you think of this ventilation record? And it's the dew point rule. You only have one question: how did they get into the headspace safely to calculate that? Because you have to have airflow across the thermometers. You can't just push a couple of the thermometers into the space and dangle it there. That's why you have a whirling hygrometer. And in that headspace, of course, you've got the added problem of potential fumigation, which is something else maybe you want to touch on, Stephanie?
Yeah, so I mean, with all grain cargoes and seed cake cargoes, they're generally fumigated at the load port, but of course, because there is the risk of the self-heating seed cake, fumigation issues can sometimes manifest in quite large quantities of damage after fumigation. So, for example, I've seen a number of seed cake fires because of fumigation pellets have been piled during the application process. So, I mean, with all grain cargo fumigations, it's important to watch what the fumigator's doing. But if they're just coming on board and literally just pouring the fumigation pellets into one area, or just pouring it from the coaming from the deck, then that's not a good fumigation, because you're going to risk piling of the pellets, which can build up to high levels of phosphine gas, which can be explosive. But also in seed cakes, there's the potential for ignition and a fire to occur, which may last the length of the voyage as well, which can be very distressing to the crew in the vessel. So it's really important to make sure they're not just coming on board, pouring the fumigant in one place, and they're actually taking the time to walk it in over the surface, or ensure that the piping's been laid for the recirculation fumigation. But all the roles of the fumigator, they're clearly highlighted in the back of the IMSBC code. And the role of the crew and the role of the fumigator are highlighted there, so they should be following that and undertaking those steps to ensure that the fumigation is safe.
Yeah, I mean, clustering your fumigation pellets, never good practice, but in the case of sea cake, potentially even worse. There, so your crew to keep an eye on it. Lights, I suppose, as well. I think you mentioned that yesterday. It's another firm favourite, always has been. Hold lighting.
Yeah, lights can get up to over 100 degrees Celsius. If they're in contact with a seed cake, you're going to get slow burning and potential fires. So we've seen that time and time again with cargo lights coming into contact with seed cake cargo. So yeah, very important to look for, not to ensure those cargo lights are removed from the hold and everything's turned off.
Yeah, and speaking of heat sources, of course, and we've discussed this before with other cargoes, as well as sea cake, is your fuel oil tanks.
Yeah, we often, if you had heat transfer in a corn cargo, you'd get some mold damage, some discoloured caked cargo on top of the fuel oil tank in the hold. But in a seed cake cargo, you're going to get, if that heating is allowed to occur for a long time, and you've got very high temperatures from the fuel oil tanks, you're going to get black cargo, a black seed cake, which turns into a mini type of some sort of concrete almost, which you're going to find it very difficult to remove from the bottom of your hold. So it's really important to manage the fuel oil temperatures in if fuel oil is being carried in association to the cargo hold. I know it's not always possible, but if you can avoid, if there are fuel oil tanks in the topside wings, then perhaps not loading fully so that the cargo is not in direct contact with those tanks if possible. But really, to manage the fuel oil temperatures is the best option for reducing any heat transfer into the cargo.
Yeah, I mean, we've written a few things on the VLSFOs as well, and sort of getting your fuel tested before using it wherever possible. So the pour point plus 10, maybe a little bit higher than in traditional old fuels. There, I've got a question, which is a good question actually. That's going to go straight to Stephanie from George, who says, how many days back should a valid cargo test 9.2.2 or 9.2.3.3 be dated? So I suppose you mean, George, a little bit like the Group A cargo tests have a validity.
Like the MC test, the MC test we have for Group A cargoes, that kind of things.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything written in the code about that. Obviously, it's got to be for the cargo that's being loaded, but...
Yeah, no, it's not. There's nothing written in the code, but if for the moisture and oil contents, you'd be expecting those tests to have been taken out in a number of days before loading, ideally. I mean, if the stockpile, if it's a port which is regularly exporting that commodity, then they should be taking out regular testing of the stockpiles arriving. So I would really expect if you are able to obtain the actual analysis certificates, they should be within a week or two of loading, if not a number of days really. But yeah, unfortunately, there's no date or time specification in the IMSBC code.
Worth the question. If it's over a couple of weeks old, then you can start poking around a little bit more. It's a good question though, George. It's an interesting one, but I know there's nothing written in the code as such, like there is with the Group A cargoes. But a week or two max, I think, is what Stephanie's saying there. So yeah, monitoring wise, anything else? I think we've covered pretty much everything monitoring wise there. I think Effie will back you up. Everything we've discussed there: fuel records, ventilation records, temperatures on loading, temperatures throughout the voyage, all of those logs, accuracy, good records. The crew should be filling them in like they are definitely going to be questioned, whether they are or not. You know, I think that's a fair enough comment, Effie, for any aftermath that occurs.
Yes, I fully agree, and this should be actually good preservation of all these records. So the load board is key in defending any claims that may arise at the discharge port, together with any other documentation, just in the event that you might be having any disputes with your charterers about perhaps say time lost in the load board for the declaration staff. Just keep records also of any request that you are making just before you arrive there, any responses that you might be getting, at least, or not least, to be able to prove that yes, you have, make everything possible, exercised all your options to have these documents available before you get there. So you avoid any sort of criticism from their side that, find they arrived, but they didn't ask, for instance.
Excellent, thank you, Effie. We have got a new publication coming out soon, or well, it's not a new publication, it's a revamped Mariner's Role in Collecting Evidence, which is again available in the book, but it'll also be app-based, so the crews can upload their evidence directly to it, hopefully. We'll keep you posted as to when that comes out. So I think we're bang on time, pretty much. There are some new things on the website. CWA, Stephanie herself, and I think Ben as well, helped us with a couple of these documents. The first one there, the cargo care checklist for Sea Cake. You see on the front of it, it's got like a flow diagram there. I recommend you take a quick look at that if you carry a fair bit of Sea Cake. What I'll do is I'll attach it to the email with a recording video on it for you as well. That first page just gives you a simple breakdown of what you'd expect to see when you receive the declaration. It's just a yes or no, load, don't load, basically. And we've tried to sort of make it as simple as possible so that you can help you make those decisions. And then the briefing, which has been around for a long time, has been updated again with Stephanie and team helping out to include these new schedules. So to summarize very briefly what we've seen, please try and push for as far in advance as you can to get this declaration, because the problems are usually the fact that we're having a matter of hours, not even multiple, half a day to ask these questions when they come in. It is literally hit the mooring lines are nearly ashore, and in some cases loading has started, and then the declaration, and then the questions, and then that's what's causing that friction. So as best you can, as much time as possible for that declaration. This is not a name change. It is not just a paper chase. There are new tests, there are new requirements to stop this self-heating problem that has been perpetuating through this cargo in the past. Remember to get your crews to act like it's a Group B cargo, even if it's declared as Group C. Okay, so temperatures on loading, temperatures throughout passage, and temperatures on discharge as well, to be honest with you, wherever possible, in case there's any allegations later on. We've had one that went down to sort of wet damage that was potential self-heating, but we had no discharge temperatures to sort of look at on that. Make sure all of those records are excellent. Consider looking at your document of compliance. If you intend to carry the new Group B schedule, it'll need to be on there. It'd be nice to be a little bit ahead of the game rather than contacting class when you get alongside. And please try not to load without having that declaration in your hand, because it causes even more friction if there is a problem in the long run. Any further questions from anybody at all? Please feel free. You also have my email address. If anything pops into your head about questions or anything like that, then please feel free at any time to contact us, and we'll try our very best to answer those.